So while doing this, it's interesting to see that there are a lot of pertinent scholarly literature that doesn't focus on the teacher shortage in relationship to what institutions of higher educations can or are doing. There's some that look at alternative certification programs as a means of combating teacher shortage, but that's a whole different beast that I'm not going to tackle right now. But I will acknowledge that that particular literature deals with the need for alternative certification programs, which comes from the idea that institutions of higher education aren't doing what they need to do to produce a large pool of qualified teacher candidates. If I got into that, that would lead me down a totally different path that is not the focus of this presentation, but I do have to acknowledge that that exists. I mentioned Dr. Ingersoll Befall from the University of Pennsylvania, and he's a major player in the literature in this area. And he's been in the field doing research in this area for the past two decades. And according to much of his research, when it comes to the teacher shortage, we're looking at the wrong diagnosis and the wrong prescription. His work focuses on the possibility that organizational characteristics and conditions of schools drive teacher turnover. By using schools and staffing data and teacher surveys that were conducted by the National Center of Education, he finds that teacher staffing problems are not principally due to teacher shortage. Schools don't have an insufficient supply of qualified teachers, but schools don't suffer from an insufficient supply of qualified teachers, but from an excessive demand. And so the problem that I have in trying to understand what that exactly means is I feel like the idea that schools don't suffer from an insufficient supply of quality teachers, but from an excessive demand. Isn't that exactly what the teacher shortage is? There may be qualified teachers, but the amount of teachers that we have are not meeting the needs of what schools and districts require. Other scholars like Dr. Mary Brownell, Dr. Paul Sinclair, and Dr. Bonnie Billingsley are major players in the realm of teacher shortage, but they look at it from a special education perspective. And so that was interesting for me, or those are the scholars that I tend to draw on because of my interest in special education. And so in recent years, actually as early as this year, Dr. Billingsley did some research and discussed national and regional strategies that have been used to combat teacher shortage, and she critiqued some of these strategies. So basically, some of her findings discussed the limitations of things like stop and go strategies that use distance education technologies to deliver content area instruction. And so she said that that may work in some areas, but when it specifically comes to special education, this becomes very difficult because securing special education teachers is one thing. When we add the component of delivering content through distance education technology, that becomes a greater issue because it involves a lot of collaboration. And we already know in the realm of special education, having general education teachers and special education teachers collaborate just in a regular setting is an issue. So that's something that's going to transcend trying to do this in a distance education technology setting. Some of the research also discussed professional developments like crash seminars, on-site professional developments, and professional developments through distance programs that have been used to combat this issue. And a lot of it is concluding that some of these are useful, but how useful they are, scholars have not been able to discern that yet. So more importantly, a lot of this literature that I'm looking at with these three authors are going to touch on financial incentives for recruiting teachers. And so that right there deals with teacher shortage and what states and local governments are doing in order to combat that. And so they argue that federal and state governments are offering financial incentives to provide relief for teachers initially, and that can possibly attract teachers in critical shortage areas. But they also argue that how these financial programs are rolled out play a part in whether these teachers will be attracted and whether they'll stay. And so what they've noted is that incentives that are comprehensive and well organized have a better chance of succeeding, while incentives that aren't comprehensive and aren't coordinated well will fail, which makes sense. So much of this research concludes that much of this research includes with the idea that there needs to be a more comprehensive approach to solving the teacher supply and demand problem, an approach that is driven by personnel data. So researchers need to look at personnel data a bit more in order to understand and combat the supply-demand issue that we're having in teacher education. So what this is showing me is that that is a gap within the literature. Now, in looking at the directive that I'm looking at, that the directive absolutely does not or is not able to be something that's used to fill in this gap. But I'm noting that that is a gap in the research that needs to be addressed. And so after looking at all of that, what I'm wondering is how this specific executive directive is going to help the teacher shortage crisis in Virginia. So there are two really important questions that I have to look at when I'm looking at this policy, as whether it's going to be a Band-Aid for Virginia or whether it's going to be something that's sustainable. So for me, the questions become, how will it potentially impact the quality of teachers that teacher preparation programs are producing? So before teacher preparation programs, they had these teacher candidates for 5 years. The schools themselves had the teacher candidates for 5 years. And then within 5 years, there are certain things that they were able to do. And shrinking the time that these candidates will have in programs, yes, financially it is great for the teacher candidates, but that means that there will be some things that these programs will have to eliminate. So they're eliminating them on the teacher preparation side. That's going to impact what these teachers know and are able to do when they enter the classroom. Statistically, teachers already report that they're not prepared to deal with the realities of the classroom. How will a policy like this help that or hinder that? And I think it will be more so of a hindrance, but what will be the cost benefits analysis of this specific directive? Also, in looking at it, I also wonder what kind of supports will schools and districts need to put in place to support these teacher candidates who have less time in their teacher preparation programs. So they're going to need some type of support by way of in-service. So the pre-service is shrunk, the in-service is going to need to be magnified. So what is that going to look like for schools and districts in all over Virginia? And so when thinking about that, finally, I wonder, because on the front end, it's less money for teacher preparation. It's less money that teacher preparation programs will be receiving. It's less money that students will have to put into these programs, but it's going to be more money that districts and schools are going to have to shell out by way of in-service. So is it going to be worth having them complete a 5-year program is it going to be worth them completing this program in 4 years if they're going to be less prepared, and in the long run, schools and districts are going to have to pay more to give them professional developments and mentors and things of that nature?